Our speaker. Our speaker is Jack Brock. He works here at DCA. He is the Senior Policy and Data Analyst with the Office of Research. And he's going to talk to us today about Hotel Motel Tax. And you may already be receiving some of the Hotel Motel Tax funds to do your work. But the main thing is that you're going to be able to know who to call if you do have questions, because it is Jack. He's the man. He's the man with all the answers. So I want to go ahead and introduce him and let him pull up his slide deck.
Great. Thanks, Shuri. Again, my name's Jack Brock. I'm the senior analyst on our research team, and I'm the one who's oversees our Hotel Motel Tax program at DCA. Feel free to interrupt my presentation at any point if you have any questions. You can either drop them in the chat, I'll be monitoring that, or feel free to speak up as well if you wish. So first, I'll go over some of the background and logistics surrounding the Hotel Motel Tax. First, you may be wondering what my Office of Research is. We create and collect several required reports and surveys from local governments and local authorities throughout the state. You may be familiar with some of our reports, such as the Report Local Government Finance, Government Management Indicator Survey, Debt Issuance Report, the Annual Authority Registration Financial Report. And finally, while we have those reports, we also have a four-part role when it comes to the Hotel Motel Tax. So firstly, we're the repository for all Hotel Motel Tax ordinances and enabling legislations in the state. Sorry, misclicked. So when we get one, I put the ordinance into our library. Second, we have a rule when it comes to reporting. We promulgate an annual report on the Hotel Motel Tax, which I'll touch on later in this presentation. Third, we convene something called the Performance Review Board to annually review any Hotel Motel Tax complaints. I'll also touch on that later in our presentation. And finally, logistics. We assist local government officials and other officials throughout the community on questions they have with the Hotel Motel Tax, though not legal guidance, such as what I am doing here today. To make sure we're all on the same page as to what the Hotel Motel Tax is, I'm going to go over the lodging receipt when you stay at a hotel. First, you have that base Hotel Motel rate that you know going in is what you're going to pay, the advertised rate. So it says something like $100 a night. But then on top of that, when you get your receipt, there are several other lines, including the sales and use tax, which depending on the local jurisdiction will be between 6 and 9% in Georgia. Second, you'll also see a flat $5 per room per night fee, and that goes straight to the state of Georgia for transportation purposes. Lastly, you'd also see the local hotel motel excise tax, which goes straight towards local governments. That's the tax we're talking about today. The sales and use tax and the state $5 per room per night fee, that goes towards the Department of Revenue in Georgia, but local governments get that local hotel motel excise tax straight themselves, which, as far as I'm aware, is one of the only, probably either the only, I'm not a complete expert, but probably the only tax that goes straight towards local governments in Georgia. Next, I'll quickly touch on the history of the Hotel Motel Tax as we have gone from the caveman era to the flying car era. First, 1975, House Bill 248 allowed counties and municipalities to impose a Hotel Motel Tax. 1976, City of Brunswick quickly adopted the first Hotel Motel Tax in Georgia. But by 2008, there are 24 different authorization paragraphs that allowed governments to collect the Hotel Motel Tax. So that's 24 different sets of rules on how to collect and spend the tax. So the state legislator was like, that's a lot of different sets of rules. So they changed it and narrowed it down to 3 options. And in 2021, House Bill 317 changed the definition of innkeeper to include marketplace facilitators such as Airbnb, Vrbo, HomeAway. And I'll touch on that later, but that doubled or in some jurisdictions tripled the amount of Hotel Motel Tax jurisdictions we're collecting, which is why I'm saying we're now in this flying car era. As I said on the last slide, there are now 3 authorization paragraphs, or think of them as 3 sets of rules that governments are now allowed to collect the tax under. First, OCGA 481351A1, which allows governments to collect at that 1 to 3% rate. 51A3, which allows governments to collect at the 5% rate, and then 51B, which allows governments to collect under the 6 to 8% rate. So as I mentioned earlier, there are 24 different paragraphs before 2008, and governments who were on those paragraphs at the time are allowed to still collect under those paragraphs if they so choose. So we currently have 40 governments that are still on those 20 legacy paragraphs. This presentation focuses on the main 3 paragraphs that the other 260 governments in Georgia are collecting under. But if you have any questions on those legacy paragraphs, feel free to reach out to me or any of my colleagues at DCA, and we'd be happy to help answer them. I'm going to quickly touch on what the hotel motel tax in Georgia looks like at the moment. As you can see in this graph, we're collecting more and more hotel motel tax over time, other than a dip in 2020 because of the pandemic. And while you see this slight dip in 2023, that's because we still have approximately 25% of governments have not yet reported on fiscal year 2023, which is a problem. We're trying to fix it. But we do project that that hotel motel tax collections in the state are 500 million plus, which would be a new record high for Georgia. And that's both in real and nominal terms. It's not just because of inflation that we're seeing the numbers rise. We're seeing the amount of hotel motel tax collections rise because of a rise in tourism share in Georgia and more governments collecting at the higher rates. As I just said, more governments are collecting at this 8% rate. Just a couple years ago, 5% was the rate that the majority of governments were collecting at, but we're seeing more and more governments, about 8 a year, moving up to 8%. And again, I think it was 7 governments this year passed the state legislature to get permission to collect at 8%. So those are just waiting on the governor's signature before I add 7 more governments to that 119 number. So more and more governments are moving up to 8% every year. In this map, that the darkest blue sections are those governments at 8%. We're seeing more and more governments, particularly on the coast and in northern Georgia, move up to 8% these days. So if you work in a government that is not currently collecting the tax or wishes to move to the 1 to 5% tax, here's how it's done, and it's done completely at the local level. You just need to pass a local ordinance, and you don't need any action from the state. If you would need ordinance guidance, you can find it on DCA's Hotel Motel Tax webpage, which is at this QR code link. The key thing to know with passing the ordinance is the earliest day you can collect the hotel motel tax is the first day of the second month after that local ordinance passes. Finally, after the ordinance is passed, it is required by rules and regulations to send it to DCA because we need to have it in our repository. So just email any new ordinance. That's if an ordinance is passed for the first time, or if an ordinance is updated, that ordinance needs to be emailed to research@dca.ga.gov. Now, if you're wishing to move up to that 6 to 8% level, there are some additional steps required. First, your local government would need to pass a resolution. This resolution needs to request an enactment of a local act by the General Assembly. It needs to specify the tax rate you're wishing to collect at, that's 6, the 7, or the 8%. You need to identify any potential tourism product development projects. I'll touch on what tourism product development is later. And then you need to specify the allocation of which funds are going to your general fund, which funds are going to restricted funds. Which that's laid out on the law anyway, so that part should be fairly easy, but it does specify in law that resolution needs to specify the allocation of proceeds. Next, a local act needs to pass the General Assembly. So you need a member of your local delegation to introduce a local act. It needs to pass both chambers, and then it needs to be signed by the governor. Now, I've never once seen, other than in the case of Savannah, government get any pushback from the state from the General Assembly on passing the bills. If it's introduced early enough, it's almost guaranteed to pass. Lastly, it comes back to local government again. Now you need to pass your ordinance, which would establish any additional details from the resolution that maybe the resolution didn't cover. And it needs to have the effective date. And once again, make sure you're putting in that tax rate. And then again, it is required by rules and regulations to send that ordinance to DCA. This next section, I'll touch on the mechanics of restricted spending. So, if you're familiar, even just a little bit with the hotel motel tax world, then you know there's these two acronyms, TCT and TPD. You may be asking, what are those? Those are two types of restricted spending. One's tourism conventions and trade shows, the other's tourism product development. The key thing to know is governments collecting at 5% or above must spend money on tourism conventions and trade shows, and governments collecting at 6% or above have the option to spend money on tourism product development. So let's dive deeper into those restricted funding types. First up, tourism convention and trade shows. I like reading the definition straight from code because it's real short. It means planning, conducting, or participating in programs of information and publicity designed to attract or advertise tourism conventions or trade shows. These monies are expended by something called a destination marketing organization. They must be spent in the fiscal year in which it was collected. And for questions on the appropriateness of expenditures, it's always good to ask your city or county attorney. So this means tourism convention trade shows. This is a tourism marketing fund. The key word being programs of information and publicity. So what does qualify as tourism convention trade shows? We're talking about brochures, billboards, magazines, social media and internet marketing campaigns, radio and television commercials, attracting conventions and trade shows to your jurisdiction. Again, keywords being programs of information and publicity. So what doesn't qualify as TCT or tourism convention and trade shows? I like to use the example of a 4th of July festival. For the 4th of July festival, you can use tourism convention and trade shows monies to promote the festival by putting up brochures around your area, by putting out social media campaigns saying, come to our 4th of July festival. But you can't spend the money on buying the fireworks for the festival because it has to be a program of information publicity and not paying for the event itself. So anything that's not a program of information publicity doesn't qualify. So make sure you aren't paying for fireworks, concerts, or festivals using your tourism convention and trade shows money. But when you're unsure, make sure to review the definition and code and then ask your city or county attorney. As I mentioned earlier, it is required by code that this tourism convention trade show money be spent by a destination marketing organization. I'm not going to read the whole definition, but basically the code is very clear that this destination marketing organization is a private sector nonprofit under Section 501c6 of the IRS code, whose primary responsibilities are to encourage travelers to come to your area. The code really doubles down on this by saying a private sector nonprofit is certainly a 501c6 nonprofit. There are some alternative recipients of TCT money laid out in code, such as the state, a department of the state government, such as the Explore Georgia wing of the Department of Economic Development, the Georgia Department of Natural Resources. If you have a state park in your area and you want to work to promote it together, DNR is a great choice. A state authority is also an eligible recipient, such as the Jekyll Island Authority or the Stone Mountain Memorial Authority. And finally, the last option is a Convention and Visitors Bureau Authority created through a local act of the General Assembly for a municipality, or a combination of these entities. I do say, I see 90% of governments choose that destination marketing organization option, that Section 501c6 nonprofit, but all these other options you see on the screen right now are eligible recipients as well. There are also some alternative purposes you can use TCT for other than the programs of information publicity. You can also use it for supporting a facility owned or operated by a state authority for convention and trade show purposes, or supporting a facility owned by local governments if agreements are in place by certain dates. By certain dates, it's 1992 and before in code. So I would imagine that facility would look something like this. But if you think you qualify for one of these alternative options, I'd make sure to talk to your city or county attorney first to confirm this. There's not many governments that this applies to. I often get the question if downtown development authorities and Main Street organizations are eligible destination marketing organizations. And the answer when it comes to downtown development authorities is that local authorities are public entities and therefore not eligible for TCT funds. They're not Section 501c6 nonprofits, nor are they any of those other options that are listed on the earlier screen. Now, Main Street organizations can be eligible destination marketing organizations, but only if they're a standalone nonprofit with 501c6 status. If it's just a wing of the government, then it is not an eligible tourism convention and trade shows partner. Next up, I'll touch on the other type of restricted funding, which is tourism product development. This definition is a little bit longer, but I still like reading it. It's the creation or expansion of physical attractions which are available and open to the public and which improve the destination appeal to visitors, support visitors' experience, and are used by visitors. Such expenditures may include capital costs and operating expenses. So while tourism convention and trade shows more of a tourism promotion fund, tourism product development is more of a tourism capital fund. It's for building new projects or making sure your current projects are being maintained well. There are no restrictions on the expender as there is with tourism convention trade shows. TCT has to be expended by a destination marketing organization. Tourism product development, the government can keep it and expend it itself, or they can choose to partner with a destination marketing organization or any other organization they choose because there's no restrictions on the expender. For governments under a 51B tax rate, that's that 6 to 8% tax rate, a percentage of revenue can be restricted for tourism product development, but it's not required you expend money on tourism product development. But that money doesn't go back to your general fund. Instead, it would have to be used for additional tourism convention and trade shows if you choose not to expend tourism product development. I'll say almost every government under 51B does choose to expend money on tourism product development, but we always throw it in there that it's not required. It's just an option. So what qualifies as tourism product development? I like to say the people who wrote the code on tourism product development are a lot kinder than the people who wrote the code on tourism convention trade shows, because there's about 20 to 30 different options listed out in code as this is explicitly okay to be tourism product development. Well, we got nothing like that with tourism convention trade shows. I'm not going to read through the whole list, but I do have some examples. Stadiums are on that list, and Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta was partially paid for using tourism product development money. Museums are on that list. The Vidalia Onion Museum was built using tourism product development money. Park improvements are on that list. Recently, it was LJ that put this, or it was actually Gilmer County, put in this pool in a park using tourism product development money. Conference centers are on the list. The Clarence Brown Conference Center in Cartersville was built using tourism product development money. Wayfinding signage is on the list. The city of Jackson put in Stranger Things filming sites wayfinding signage because they have a lot of people that come in looking for Stranger Things filming sites. But those are just a few of the several options that are listed on that list. Some additional things to know when it comes to tourism product development. Just like tourism convention and trade shows money, tourism product development funds should be budgeted to be spent in the fiscal year in which they are collected. A project has to be identified as tourism product development in the jurisdiction's annual budget. Tourism product development funds can be used to secure debt for larger projects. I often get the question, how are we supposed to build our projects when we have to spend the money in the fiscal year in which it was collected? Do I just build a library in 30 different parts? Like one part every year for 30 years. And it's like, no, you can use tourism product development funds to secure debt, go ahead and build that library, and then you can pay off the debt over time using the tourism product development funds. Often I also get the question, can our own residents enjoy these projects? And it's like, yes, of course. Just make sure that the facilities are also open and used by visitors as well as your residents. Now I'm going to start to break down under the main three tax rates, which funds get allocated towards non-restricted versus restricted funds. When you're collecting under 51A1, that 1 to 3% tax rate, all 100% of your hotel motel tax revenue is non-restricted and can be used on any legal purpose. When you jump up to the 5% paragraph, you still have your original 3 pennies, 3%, 3 pennies. We like to call percents pennies here. All 3 pennies still go. So 3 pennies still go to your non-restricted funds, but the next 2 additional pennies goes towards tourism, convention, and trade shows. So for a total breakdown of 60% non-restricted, 40% towards tourism, convention, and trade shows. Once you jump up to the next paragraph, the 6 to 8% paragraph, you still have your original 3% or 3 pennies are still non-restricted. You never get more than 3% or 3 pennies towards non-restricted funds. And you still have that next additional 2% under tourism, convention, and trade shows. But now when you unlock tourism product development, every additional percent you go past 5%, it gets split evenly between tourism, convention, and trade shows and tourism product development. So at 6%, this is what your breakdown would look like. 7%, this is what your breakdown would look like. And finally, at 8%, you still have 3% goes non-restricted. Now you have 3.5% towards tourism, convention, and trade shows, and 1.5% can go to tourism product development. Otherwise, it has to be additional tourism, convention, and trade shows. For a total percent breakdown of 37.5% non-restricted, 43.75% tourism, convention, and trade shows, 18.75% tourism product development.
Jack, we had a question in the chat. Could you please define visitor? Does it have to be someone from, 10 miles away, 20 miles away, 50 miles away?
I often get this question, and according to code, there's no definition of visitor. So it's whatever your government decides is your target audience. But there's no restrictions in code as to what a visitor to your community is. It could be someone who lives right outside it. There's no mile marker.
Okay. Because I was a little surprised at the pool you showed us in Gilmer County. To me, that doesn't look like something that a visitor would travel to go to. It looks like something more for residents.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I do think, again, since there's no restrictions on what a visitor is, if your pool is bringing people from 10 minutes outside the city's jurisdiction and they're now spending money in your community,
Mhm.
that counts as tourism as far as the hotel motel tax is concerned. So as long as your attorneys agree on this does serve visitors, if whatever your attorney thinks the best definition of visitor is, then it's totally fine, at least in DCA's eyes.
Cool. Thank you.
Mhm. Okay, so working with other governments, we don't want to see counties and cities get into fights, but it is, according to code, each county is a special district for the purpose of the hotel motel tax, excluding territory within its boundaries of a municipality that imposes an excise tax. So what this means is a county can collect the hotel motel tax in any unincorporated areas in a county or inside of cities that aren't collecting the tax. But as soon as the city starts collecting the tax, the city gets all the tax inside of the city's jurisdictions and the county gets none of it anymore. So residents don't get double taxed by a county or city. Residents in a hotel don't get double taxed by a county or a city. Instead, each county and city are a special district for the tax. But what cities and counties can do to work together is they can jointly contract with the same destination marketing organization to promote the broader area and maximize marketing dollars. And we do often see counties and cities choose the same destination marketing organization instead of having their own. So we like to see counties and cities working like clockwork instead of fighting. Working with destination marketing organizations. If your community collects a tax of 5% or more, you're working with a destination marketing organization of some kind. The local government, though, is still responsible for ensuring the appropriate usage of the tax, which means it's good to build and maintain a healthy relationship with your destination marketing organization to make sure the tax is being spent correctly. We do recommend developing a contract or MOU every year with your destination marketing organization. It is required by code that you have a contract in place. It doesn't specify every year. That's just our recommendation so that you can discuss priorities and expectations prior to the beginning of each fiscal year. It's also good to make sure you're specifying amounts as a percent of total hotel motel tax collections because that is how it's laid out in code. We don't want to see a contract say we're only giving our destination marketing organization 100,000 this year, because it should be a percent of whatever you bring in. And we do see counties and cities get tripped up by that sometimes. Now I'm going to touch on some special topics and then get into reporting to DCA at the end. First, state parks and the hotel motel tax. State parks operated by the Department of Natural Resources are required to collect the hotel motel tax if it has rooms and meeting facilities, or it has a minimum of 20 cabins. This doesn't apply to a lot of state parks, but it does apply to 10 to 20 of them. The rate collected on the state parks are the same as the jurisdiction the park is in, but it does come with different expenditure rules, as 100% of the revenue collected off of state parks has to be expended for development, promotion, and advertising of the state park. Next up, I'm going to talk about short-term vacation rentals. As I mentioned earlier, in 2021, jurisdictions were allowed to start collecting the hotel motel tax off of short-term vacation rentals. This required marketplace facilitators such as Airbnb, Vrbo, HomeAway, and other short-term vacation rental platforms to collect and remit both the hotel motel tax and the state $5 transportation fee. For most jurisdictions, this resulted in a lot of new hotel motel tax revenue, and I'll probably start taking this out soon because it's been 4 years. But for some jurisdictions that have been collecting the hotel motel tax from property owners, short-term vacation rentals may be remitting the hotel motel tax differently than they were to your government before, if you already had a local ordinance requiring the short-term vacation rentals to remit the hotel motel tax. At its core, the House bill changed the definition of innkeeper to include short-term vacation rental properties, so that every vampire renting out their mansion now had to pay the hotel motel tax. Collections from short-term vacation rental platforms are subject to the same spending restrictions as other hotel motel tax collections, which I know some of you, that makes people mad because they want more general fund money, but it's the same percentages as before. I do like to say this because I get this question a lot. There's no impact on any other front-end regulation of short-term vacation rental properties by this law. So facilitators are not required to share data or personal information. There's nothing at the state level limiting the number of short-term vacation rentals in an area or jurisdiction. There's no annual registration at the state level. There's no neighbor or HOA notification, no insurance requirements, no licensing and registration fees. This was only a bill that required them to start collecting and remitting the hotel motel tax. If you have any issues with the rate being collected off of the short-term vacation rentals, DCA has some recommended steps. Make sure your ordinance is up to date with DCA. We do know these short-term vacation rental properties are checking the DCA website to make sure they're collecting and remitting the right rate to local governments. So if your ordinance isn't up to date with us, it's probably not up to date with these companies. At the same time, I've also heard from these companies that they look on Unicode or equivalents to make sure, again, the ordinances they're collecting and remitting the right rate. So make sure your ordinance is up to date on whatever website you use to store your ordinances. Finally, we just have to recommend reaching out to the platforms directly. At the state level, we don't have contacts with these companies, so you'll need to reach out to them directly if you have any issues if you think you have any issues with the rate being collected. Next up, I'll talk about the hotel motel tax report. It's required by code as a condition of continuing authorization to impose the tax. So it is important that you turn this in. But I know that makes you say, yay, reporting, because I know that's probably y'all's favorite thing to do. But this is what the hotel motel tax report looks like these days. It's due within 6 months of the end of a government's fiscal year. It uses the same login as DCA's other web-based reports if you're turning in a report, local government finance, or the government management indicator survey. There's 4 main components of the report. First, you're going to confirm the rate and ordinance to make sure we have the right rate and ordinance on file. You need to tell us how much hotel motel tax revenue you collected during the fiscal year. You need to tell us how much you spent on TCT, how much you spent on TPD. And finally, there's something called the Project Contractor Information Schedule. This is also required by code in a separate part. It's a schedule that shall identify the project or projects involved and the contracted entity involved in such expenditure. So basically, it's a form where we're asking you, how did you spend the restricted funding during the year? For the tourism convention and trade shows form, the contracted entity, the destination marketing organization, needs to complete the form and submit it to the local government, who turns it in as a part of the total report. For this report, we're not looking for every single pen bought using TCT money. We're looking at high level expenditures. We want to know, how much money did you spend promoting your 4th of July festival? How much money did you spend promoting your summer concert series? How much general promotion did you do? Things of that accord. And if you're a government that is collecting tourism product development, you need to make sure to fill out the tourism product development form as well. Again, this one shouldn't take you that long. Most governments don't have more than 1 or 2 tourism product development projects at a time. Just need to fill in, we're building a museum, or we're renovating our theater, or we're just maintaining the community auditorium. Pretty simple in the end. There are some additional finance requirements I'd like to touch on. The government's annual audit needs to disclose the amount of funds, hotel motel tax funds expended during the fiscal year, amount of tax receipts during the fiscal year, expenditures as a percentage of tax receipts, and a determination of compliance with spending requirements. So just make sure when you're turning in that audit to the Department of Audits and Accounts every year that these things are included. It's also required that your contractor, your destination marketing organization also has audit verification that expenditure requirements are met. Lastly, code requires both the DMO, the destination marketing organization, and the government must both annually adopt a budget plan specifying how the hotel motel tax funds are going to be spent. But the carrot that comes with that is compliance with that budget plan satisfies the requirement that funds be spent in the fiscal year they're collected. So if you followed your budget plan to the best of your ability and you have a couple thousand left over at the end of the fiscal year, no one's going to look twice at that if you had a budget plan in place and you followed it to the best of your ability. But if you didn't have a budget plan in place, then you are in violation if you have a couple $1,000s left over at the end of the fiscal year. So make sure you get those budget plans done. For my last slide, I'm going to talk about the performance review board that I mentioned at the beginning. The performance review board is convened to hear hotel motel tax complaints. These complaints must be received by June 1st every year for the performance review board to hear it. These complaints can come from anyone addressing a local government or destination marketing organization regarding the current or most recently fiscal year. And this is what that form looks like. These complaints can be about things such as not spending all the hotel motel tax funds you're supposed to during the year, not spending them correctly, not collecting the tax correctly, things of that accord. The complaints are heard by the 11-member performance review board. This board is made up of appointees from high-ranking officials in the state, such as the governor, lieutenant governor, speaker of the house, etc. They hear the complaints, they'll hear both sides of it, and then they'll make any recommendations for remedial action. But I tell you guys this in order to be wary that this is a thing that could occur, but we only get about one of these a year, and it's usually in jurisdictions collecting millions of hotel motel tax in a year. So it's something to be like, okay, I should be doing this right so this doesn't happen, but at the same time, don't stress out about it. But I will say, like, let's make sure we are doing things correctly, because it is my least favorite part of my job, where I got to bring in me and my team of investigators in order to perform this hotel motel tax investigation. So let's make sure we're being compliant with all the spending requirements, and this should never be a problem.
Zach, is that you there in the middle leading that team?
Yeah, that's my intention. I plugged it in. I told an AI generator to create art of me leading a team of investigators with DCA branding, and that's
I
what
love it.
popped out.
I love that
I think
graphic.
it's a very funny picture in my mind.
I love it.
But it is, yeah. Are there any final questions for me?
Have any other questions? You can
Well, if
type
you
them
don't
in the
have any,
chat.
yeah, any more, you can feel free to reach out to my email and my phone number on this page here, and I'm always happy to help out.
All right. Thank you so much, Jack. I really appreciate it. And now at
No
least y'all
problem.
know, y'all put a face with a name. So if y'all have any questions, you can always go to Jack.